Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Two Nobodies podcast. I'm your host, Rupesh Patel. Just had a fantastic conversation with my friend, Dr. Stuart McGill. We talk about world-class athletes. What are the characteristics of these athletes? From the speed athlete to the strength athlete to the elastic athlete, like that golfer, that thrower. What has he seen over his years working with these high elite individuals? We talk about recovery. We talk about what are the deficits that we're seeing from a training and coaching perspective that continue to hinder some of these athletes from reaching that next level. I've always wanted to have this conversation with Stu. It's been years in the making, to be honest. I'm glad we had it. I think there's some new things in there that you probably haven't heard from him that we really get into and at that sort of technical elite level of a conversation. So enjoy, like, subscribe, and we'll see you in the next episode after that. Thanks.
Welcome to the Two Nobodies podcast with my dad.
Stu, my friend, really good to see you. Welcome back to my podcast. It's always an honor to have you on my show. It's been 3 years since we had like this kind of longer conversation. I promise I'm not going to put you in this kind of vulnerable spot this time. We're going to talk about like spiny things and like your expertise here. So, but if you want to get a little vulnerable, we could do that too. But welcome back.
Well, thanks so much, Rupesh. It's fabulous to see you.
It's always nice to see you. And when you emailed maybe a couple months ago, you're talking about how you started eating Indian food again. I was like, what is going on? This man is like really embracing Indian culture. Something about celebrating Diwali. Like, what is going on with you?
Well, I live in a small town, Gravenhurst, Ontario, and we had a new restaurant come to town called The
Okay.
Essence of Spice. We love it. It's fabulous.
Yeah.
It's becoming very popular in town. It's the opposite of a greasy spoon, as you can imagine. And I've also consciously made some lifestyle changes.
Oh.
And remember when you were a student, you'd come over for a barbecue and all of that sort of
Oh,
thing.
and we'd be going for beers at what was it? That
Sure,
our campus pub or whatever. Yeah. Yeah.
right. And now I've consciously cut back on a lot of that. And
Okay. What's
yeah,
what's driving that?
several things. I
Okay.
had my physical a little while ago. My physician is now one of our former students, who you may
Okay.
remember. I
Interesting.
don't know, but in any case, a funny story about that. I called him up a few years ago, and I'd heard he'd become a local doc, and he reminded me. He said, well, you wrote my letter of recommendation to get into med school, and when you wrote that, you said, of course I'm going to write this letter because I'm going to need a doc when I'm an old man. And so we both had a good laugh over that.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I my uh, LDL was a
Yeah.
little high,
Okay.
and right on the cusp of the guidelines for recommending Crestor or Lipitor or something like
Okay.
that. Well, he knew
Yeah.
me well enough, and he
Yeah.
said, "You don't want to take a med anyway."
No.
So I said, "Well, let's run an experiment. Let me consciously do what I can, and through diet. My exercise was already pretty good,
Okay.
and let's see, can I switch to olive oil, less red meat,
Mm.
more vegetarian based meals, etc." Well, of course, I moved the markers, and 3 months later, we redid the bloods, and I was much better.
Oh, fantastic.
I also have you ever heard of Peter Attia?
Yes, I have heard
Okay,
Peter
so
T. Yeah.
Peter, he's known as the longevity doctor. He
Yeah.
wrote a
Yeah.
book
Yeah.
called Outlive. Anyway, I'm on his podcast next week, I guess it is.
Nice.
Well, it was pre-recorded a month or two ago, so I know how it went. But reading his book Outlive and getting into some of his wisdom also gave me the impetus to take care of the four horsemen, as he calls them, which is Alzheimer's,
Mm.
uh, um, metabolic syndrome,
Mm-hmm.
which I'm pretty skinny these days. It's
Mm.
that's not my big one. Cardiovascular
Mm.
and cancer.
Mhm.
And I thought, all right, well, I'm enjoying the heck out of life right now. I'd like to keep it going just a little bit longer in this current healthful state.
Yeah.
So that was the other motivation as
Were
well, I
you were
guess.
you resistant a bit to lifestyle changes, would you say? Or like
Well, you know me, I love beer and I
Mhm.
love chocolate.
Mhm.
And I've always been good at keeping on a weight.
Okay.
So my diet was simply this. If I'm 1 pound over 180 pounds, no beer, no chocolate, it's easy.
Okay.
If I'm under 180, I can have all the beer and chocolate and eat whatever I want.
Yeah.
So that's been my check and balance system,
Right.
so to speak. Um, it was hard to,
Mm.
even though I'm under my threshold weight, to say, so I don't drink. And
No way.
yeah, and I very rarely would I have a beer now, maybe one every 2 weeks. And I have to have a rule on that. It would only be with someone else who I enjoy.
Okay.
So yeah, was it hard to give up and change? Yeah, it really was. But
I
you
bet.
don't think about it. And again, you know me well enough. You just be quiet and do
Yeah.
it.
Yeah,
As
yeah,
simple
yeah.
as that.
Yeah, that would have been very difficult. Was it kind of incremental or was it all at once that change?
Like that.
And you've
Yeah.
been pretty good with it? Like you've been disciplined about it?
Oh yeah. Yeah. If I say it, I'll
Mm,
do it.
that's pretty good. Yeah, because especially the beer thing, like I know that you would have maybe a drink a day or something.
Oh, at
I feel
least.
like. Yeah,
At
yeah,
least. Yeah.
yeah. So
Yeah, we've
so
had
no
stories with some of my old colleagues. We'll meet at a conference in someplace in the world and
yeah,
enjoy the local beers together, and then we'll sit back and think, oh well, we had beers together in Melbourne, Australia, uh, Thailand or
yeah.
Japan or Poland or Spain or wherever it was. And it just was those great times to spend with your colleagues, talk a little bit of shop and a little bit of, you know, fun things. Anyway, enough
It's a
about
social
all
thing,
that.
right? It's a social thing for you. So
It was
yeah,
more of a celebration of my day with me.
yeah, yeah.
Again, I had to do something tangible every day,
Mm,
otherwise I felt I wasted it.
sure.
So I'd do the tangible thing, complete the list, and have a beer. So the beer was the completion of the list every day, and just
I
that final putting your
I
feet
still
up.
I still remember, Stu, you would tell me when we were working in the lab, you'd say, "Rupesh, you work hard this week and the beer will taste sweeter." I remember you'd always say that to me.
That's right.
Yes.
That's
So
right. So if you don't earn the beer, it didn't taste quite as good. But
that's
when
right.
you bleed a bit and sweat a bit, the beer
Yeah.
tastes better.
Yeah. Well, that's great to hear, Stu. I'm glad that you're making these changes. It's really I'm really glad that you're taking this seriously and you're making and the blood work is showing up really well. Like that's fantastic news. Your family's probably super thrilled about this. Catherine is probably really happy.
I don't know if I've really talked much about it, to tell you the truth.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they don't ask, I don't tell.
Okay. Fair enough. Fair enough.
We've got
Fair
more
enough.
important things to have fun with.
Yeah, I guess so. Well, that's great. Well, yeah, I'm glad that things are feeling well. I'm glad that you're healthy. Um, I want to focus today on the world class athletes, the elites. Not the average athlete. I've always had this fascination. I've always loved talking to you about this topic. But before we get into that, I want to understand because actually I don't know this part of your story, like how you got involved in looking at athletes and like when you went from like a researcher to then becoming more of this kind of clinical researcher. I don't know if will you categorize yourself that way, but um when did that transition start to happen and like what was that peak of interest for you to be like I got to start focusing on the clinical side of things and not just pure research?
It's not as planned or premeditated as you might think.
Okay.
I don't know if I found the athletes as much as they found me, which
Mm,
sounds strange. So, as you know, I started as a young professor, just probing how does the back work?
right.
And I would speak at a conference, perhaps, and there might be some team doctors there. And they would say, okay, well, that's interesting. It may solve one of our players or athletes who's impeded in their play right now because of their back. Would you come and have a look at this player? And originally I was reluctant because I wasn't trained as a clinician. And they'd say,
Mm,
well, don't worry, we'll be with you. Come and see and tell us what your background and
mm,
training sees. And I learned you know how we used to work, would be able to offer insights that they never thought about. For example, they would talk about back pain as if it was like leg pain, very
mm,
non-specific. So this was very different for them to see our approach of there's no such thing as non-specific back pain. It's all
mm,
highly specific.
mm,
We get to the specific pathways through probing the athlete. So here's how we're going to probe them. We'll listen to their stories and put together patterns, pattern recognition. Oh, yeah,
mm,
it's really bad when I get out of bed in the morning. Okay, so there's something curious about laying in bed that sensitizes them, and then they get going. Or they might say, oh, no, it's when I bend backwards to the right, some
mhm,
very specific stressor. So that was uh, a switch for them to realize what worked for one athlete was poison for the
mm,
next. So it was
mm.
the specific back pain that led them down to specific treatments, specific dosages,
Right.
specific progressions and regressions. The other thing that really shaped them, I think, um, was this idea of internal mechanics and external mechanics. Most people, when they hear the word biomechanics, their brain is not developed in this area, in
Mm,
that they think of external mechanics. So the
mm,
person bends over and they hold
right.
a load far or close
Right.
to them and they get it. The
Right.
external mechanic of holding a load far away really loads up
Mm,
their back. But that's not where the magic occurs to intervene. It comes from the internal mechanics. Now, all of a
okay.
sudden, posture really matters. You
Mm,
can bend over with a flexed spine, an extended spine, a twisted spine, and that totally redistributes the stresses internally on the tissues.
mm,
And all these internet arguments and discussions and whatnot would be solved if the foundations of the argument shifted from external mechanics to internal mechanics. People will say, "Oh, well, posture and technique doesn't matter." Well, come on, the coaches know that,
right.
but the translation and understanding internal mechanics. So those are the two major things that I think we contributed, and more coaches, teams. Uh, would call. So that's why I said I think they found us.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
the more consulting we did, the more confidence we got in realizing, well, we do have a different view with just what is the pathway and the internal mechanics side of things. So I
For
don't know if that answers your
for
question,
for
but
for a for a strength coach or whatever, or just for any coach, how would you explain that sort of difference with external and internal mechanics? Like how should they interpret that difference?
well, I'll take them to their sport.
Yeah.
So if it was MMA, let's do an arm bar. Okay, doesn't do anything. Change the angle three
Mm,
degrees. They know how to do that. And I'll
mhm,
say, okay, what did you do? You didn't really change the external mechanic. What
mm,
you changed was you migrated the stress to a vulnerable tissue through three
mm,
degrees of change. And they say, I get
mm. Yeah. Yeah.
it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or it might be a very subtle little change in a golf swing,
Mm,
or the interplay between the elastic recoil and when the muscle pulse occurs. Good athletes understand this when you can get in their world and demonstrate it. So actually, now that you've reminded me of that, understanding the sport uh, demand is critical. And if you don't understand, like I know you understand how to dunk a basketball
mm,
or something like that with
mhm.
your experience in that, so
Yeah.
you would relate to that example of how you would create the pulse in the gluteal muscles,
Yeah.
extend the hip, and push a stiffened core
Right.
to propel a long airborne time,
Yeah.
uh, and how you can manipulate your body midair, and that's external mechanics
Yeah.
now
Yeah.
to get the center of mass.
Would it also be understanding just like how all the tissues that are involved in that movement and how they're all working with each other, even just like the neural pathways and how things are firing and what's needed. Like I would imagine all that is kind of involved too.
Oh, absolutely. As you
Yeah.
know, we can create the same external movement pattern,
Yes.
which again is an external mechanic,
Yeah.
through a highly redundant system such that many different muscle sequences, fascial tensions,
Yeah.
ligament recoils, etc., would create the same external movement. But the internal mechanic will be very different in the stress concentrations that they're producing. And when a patient says, oh, or the athlete will load that particular tissue, create that particular stress concentration, and they say, ouch, okay, well, now we got it. It was the
Yeah.
internal mechanic that drove that.
Yeah, like, the hip hinge is a common one, right? Like, I think people are understanding the benefits of a proper hip hinge, but then if their hamstrings are the ones that are doing the work and not their glutes, and they're not thinking about that, right? That would be that's that specialization that coach is probably missing, right?
Right.
Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah, yeah. Um what about the athlete like that when you started getting involved with these athletes? Like where was your curiosity starting to just get enriched at that point? Like what was it about the athlete that really made you feel curious about what they do or even just about what you were researching, I guess?
As you know, I've always tried to master the craft.
Mm,
So uh, I would work with odd people that I didn't have much expertise in. So, say, this is complicated stuff.
mm,
I remember I was an expert witness in a murder case.
mm,
This person got a broken neck. Did the perpetrator, alleged perpetrator, have the manual strength to create the fracture in the neck? I mean, you got to know your mechanics to
sure.
stand on a
Yeah.
witness stand and answer these kinds of things. But the forensic, what was she called now? She was a professor of forensic anthropology.
Okay.
And all of the different nuances of the neck and the hips and the pelvis. And this was before DNA, by the
Mm,
way, was commonly used to identify people.
mhm.
But she would look at different regions of the world and have a pretty good guess as to where that particular skeletal musculotendinous conformation came from,
Yeah.
what genetic haplogroup. And this was all fascinating stuff to me. And I just learned so much from her. But my point is, I've always made a point of not going to the biomechanics meetings, but going to all these other meetings where I
Mm,
would keep mastering the craft from all of these different perspectives. So that would be one answer to the question. And the other one was, let's take the example, and I use this a lot. Say you're a car mechanic.
mhm.
If you were a car mechanic who wanted to be a master car mechanic, and someone said, would you work on my Bugatti?
Mm,
Next guy comes in and says, would you work on my Ferrari?
mhm.
Would you work on my F1 Honda?
Right.
Now, what car mechanic would say no to that? They get to drive the pinnacle of engineering, automotive engineering. So I get offered to play with basically the uh, what's the word, the most highest performing human
Mm,
in doing a particular thing, that
mm.
sport, in the world. What motivation do I need? I don't need
No,
any
can't get better than
motivation.
that. Yeah.
Yeah, I get to drive the human Ferraris
Yeah.
and see what it is that allows them to create that performance, that injury resilience, that, the full gamut. So
Was there
anyway,
s
I don't know if that answers your
No, it
question.
does, it does. I was
It's
gonna
a
say, like,
no-brainer for me.
yeah. What part of that, that exceptional human would you say you started looking at? Like, I remember there was early day well, I don't know, early days, but, like, I remember when we worked together, you used to talk a lot about the anthropometry of somebody, right? Like, just and how that made such a difference in whatever skill they were working on or whatever sport they're in. More recently, I hear you talking more about the neurological pathways and neural drive and all that. So, like, there's different elements to these people that I've seen you be curious about. What were those early curiosities kind of focused on? Do you remember?
Uh, yeah. There was certainly a progression in that. You're taking me back, I hate to say it, 45 years,
Oh
Rupesh. I
God,
don't
45
remember a
years.
lot of this.
Yeah, yeah, that's fair.
But I remember meetings with, there was a professor, I don't know if he's still a professor at Penn State, Steve Piazza,
Okay.
and he would look at the feet of Olympic sprinters
Mm,
and notice the calcaneus length versus the forefoot length. And in order to be a sprinter, you needed a certain ratio. Otherwise, you
mm,
just couldn't produce the fast speed.
yeah.
So that was interesting. And when you look at a badger who is a digger versus a cheetah, which is a
Mm,
speed machine,
mm,
the length of those levers are consistent with what the distribution of human anatomy is. But when you plot those against the people who are the fastest in the world versus the best jumpers versus the best
mm,
squatters versus the and you said fly with this podcast, so I will.
yeah.
Isn't it curious when you watch a triathlon? So three
Mm,
very different athleticisms.
mm-hmm,
The person who comes out of the swim, whether it's a lake or whatever, they come out first. I can't ever remember an incident where that person wins the triathlon.
mm,
So the athleticism that allowed them to be a fish and beautiful usually ends up being very counterproductive to running,
right.
because running is uh, tuning the body with the appropriate stiffness, which stores and recovers spring energy
Mm,
efficiently to propel you. The uh, storage and recovery of the elastic system is polar opposite for a swimmer. You want a big floppy foot
yeah.
where it can again be a fish fin.
Yeah.
So these are examples where we then get into specific athleticisms. And anyway, I don't know if
And no, and that's a good example. And like, correct me if I'm wrong, but like I think the very elite swimmers, like their torsos are much larger than the average person, right? Like they're able to kind of just be able to store more air, and that maybe is helpful with their buoyancy. And for elite runners, you see they're very long legged. I imagine there's some difference there. Am I wrong about that?
Well, no, I don't think you're wrong in principle. The torso of many swimmers is surprisingly long because that's
Hmm.
adding more to the length of the swimming body, so to speak, and
Mm,
particularly in a butterfly swimmer, that is
right.
very very much part of the propulsive mechanism. But when you say a runner, okay, well, I can go to the great distance runners who tend to be longer in the leg,
Mm,
but certainly I wouldn't say that about the great sprinters.
yeah.
But how we do that, as you'll recall, we'll take a team, for example, and I go back to your work on volleyball
Mm,
jumping as well,
mm,
and we could take the players and arrange them tallest to shortest when they're
mm,
standing and number them off 1 through 14 or whatever it
yeah.
is, and
Yeah.
then ask them to sit down on the bench and redo it. You'll see the order changes. So what we
Yeah.
just measured was torso and leg length as part of their total height.
Yeah.
And as you know from jumping mechanics, those with long legs tend to be hip
Yes.
dominant,
Yeah.
firing the glutes. Not terrific power production through the ankle. In
Mm,
fact, we just want a stiffer link between
yeah.
the knee and the ankle. Whereas if you take a longer bodied, shorter legged person, they tend to be more of a knee jumper. So
Mm,
we'll see them, more in an upright posture, knees coming forward and jumping right up. A totally
right.
different jump mechanic. So there's
Yeah.
another example. And now, wouldn't it be nice if coaches were aware of that? And think of strength coaches who they will take a volleyball team and they now give every player on the team the same strength training regimen,
Hmm.
when clearly the tallest player will probably the longest legged player will use a very different one is a back squatter, one is a front squatter, one will be an impulse storage and recovery
Hmm.
elastic machine, where the other really uses concentric muscle contraction.
Yeah.
So again, totally different tuning of the springs.
On
And
the with the strength coaches, this was my next question, is that do we still see, because I know you've talked about like when you've worked with Eastern European athletes, those coaches get it. Like they'll select the right athlete for that whatever skill or sport that they need to have them perform in. Like they'll make sure the athlete has certain anthropometrics to be able to do that skill properly. Do you find that it's kind of common now for the world class athlete, like they find the rightly designed person to be able to do that sport, or do you think there's still a gap there that people are not, as coaches, are not understanding?
yeah, several things are going through my mind, and I'm trying to go through some of the recent examples. Certainly, there's an Eastern European Russian culture of sports training, and my bias is they are generally more aware of the elastic components, um, certainly in terms of strength development, I would say.
Mm,
But then again, I go to the US and, uh, I think of like a sprint coach like Dan Paff, who
mm,
is uh, so savvy in terms of optimizing all of these things. He knows how to do it, and there's a reason why he has wonderful success. I've got a
yeah.
few stories about him if you want to hear about them. But I I would say though, 15 years ago, and my timing might be off on that.
Mm,
Prior to that, there weren't really personal trainers around. This is a new phenomenon. Now, where did all
okay.
these personal trainers come from? And what is their training and understanding of these levels? I'm going to get in trouble for saying this, but as you know, the only person who would ever come here is someone who wants some consulting for their back issue.
Hmm.
So they're coming with a back issue.
Yeah.
I would say over half of them, and probably even a bigger percentage, have been caused by their trainers and coaches, or at least made worse. So that's not a strong endorsement on the current practice of getting to the root of why this athlete
Mm,
is pained to the point of being disabled, unable to play and train,
hmm.
and then using the appropriate tools to get them out of pain, and then understanding the process of the demand of the sport. And now we have this person. Let's measure them to see, do they have the variables to meet the demands of the sport? And if they do, great. I'll bet you
Yeah.
they don't though. There
Yeah.
will be a few. What are the few that need to be focused on to retune, bring into balance? So now that's not common
Even at the
among,
world class levels too.
well, I'd be out of business if it was.
Fair.
Yeah, I mean, there'd be no need for my consulting if that was true.
That's
Uh,
interesting because I mean, like, this is, I mean, the last time we worked, I worked with you was like how many, 14, 15 years ago. And you were talking about this then and even years before that. And so to think that this is still a deficit is very interesting to me.
well, I don't know. I mean, I'm certainly not a household word. sort of an unknown in the public
In the
sphere.
mainstream, maybe, but that circle, like the training circle, the physio circle, whatever, like, you're known. People know who you are.
Well, I'll go back to what I started with. I think there's an impediment there of uh, until these groups get to the level of understanding the difference between internal and external mechanics
Mhm,
and making the leap that they're not dealing with back pain.
mhm,
No, that's just a symptom.
mm,
Until they get at the mechanism and the specificity of
right,
that individual's back pain,
right.
to understand what's the mechanism, the specifics.
Yeah,
And these are impediments that they're taught in school about non-specific back pain, and
yeah,
their subcategorization skills are, I go back to some of my clinical mentors, and I think of someone like Jeff Maitland, the great
mm,
physio from Australia,
mm,
who believed in differential diagnosis, going through the neurology, the orthopedics, the anatomy, the personality, the learning style,
mhm, mhm.
all of these things, so that you can interpret and do pattern recognition, listening to,
Being that true detective, right?
right.
Yeah,
And I would say the physios back then were far better at assessment and
mm,
whatnot than what I'm seeing now. So that's it's a kind of a harsh thing to say, but I'm afraid that's my current opinion. Now, I'm not saying all physios. There are
no,
fabulous
yeah,
physios, but I'm just saying in general. And I think the influences of social media. I
yeah,
mean,
yeah,
who's on social media? The people that I know. I mean, gosh darn, what are we now coming into February? We got the Olympics coming up. That's a
mhm,
4 year cycle for us. I get real busy every
mm,
4 years because athletes are, tapering down for the trials and then onto the big show. So all these people who claim to be working with these great athletes should be so darn busy right now that they've got no time for Facebook or whatever it is, and yet I think a lot of kids are listening to the influences on
mhm.
Facebook, which
Yeah, no, like, I think for me, it's acceptable in my mind for, like, if you're just working with well, I wouldn't even say it's acceptable for me, but, like, I can understand, I guess, or for if you're working with the average athlete, not the world class athlete, that perhaps you're not, maybe there's processes that are being shortcutted, or you're not being that true detective. But when we're talking about the world class level, like you just talked about, we're in Olympic year, and you're still seeing um, people shortcutting the process, or not diving deep and understanding the mechanisms and the root causes behind why their athlete might be suffering or whatever it might be. That to me is I'm just honestly, I'm still surprised. I'm very surprised. We've had conversations about this before. I don't
well,
get it. I don't get it.
okay, maybe I'll soften it a little bit now. So the demand of a sport at the elite level is as high as it possibly can be.
Okay.
So the athlete is challenging their system, their body, their mind, and everything else to get to the pinnacle. That is a stress. Now we know that every system is ruled by a tipping point.
Mm,
The idea is don't cross the tipping point in your training so that
mm,
you damage something, and now you've created a loss. And one of the keys is loss control. Losing through injury, that's a big deal. If you can
mm,
avoid injury, you don't necessarily have to be, it's asymmetric, in other
mhm,
words. The
mhm.
gain from a little athletic gain is not as big as the loss of an
I
injury.
see. I
You
see.
see
Yep.
what I mean?
Yep. Yep.
But now think of the trainer and the coach. They are dancing on a knife edge as they bump up against the margin of the tipping point. That margin of safety goes to a razor thin now. So
Mm-hmm.
if you don't push it, you won't get there. And sometimes you make a boo boo. I do. We all do.
Mm-hmm.
And or maybe the athlete slept funny. Their neck was in a funny
Mm-hmm.
position. And so, sorry for the language, but we're all familiar with shit happens.
Yeah.
And so sometimes shit happens, and the injury occurs. Um, but I will say this: it's a real art and a
Mm.
science to know where the tipping point is. And not only do you have to know the art and science, you have to know the athlete, and you have to know how quickly do they heal and recover. How quickly do they recover from a very intense training cycle? And maybe you got your cycle wrong. The cycle should have been 5 days instead of 10 days. Maybe it should have been 2 days off. Maybe it should have been, oh, if only we had a little bit of deep tissue guru work
Mm.
on that
Mm.
particular snag that athlete is dealing with. You know, uh,
Yeah.
I
That's
can
that.
go on, but
No,
until
that's
we have a person in front of us, it's all pie in the sky stuff. We need someone in front of us that can really hone the discussion if that's where you wanted to take this level. And then I think people would appreciate that if it was easy, everybody could do it. But
yeah. Yeah. No, that's good context. Um, yeah. Sorry, I'm just thinking about that. That's I like the way. Yeah, I understand. Like if they're trying to manage that loss control, that's an interesting. I never thought about that, to be honest. Yeah. Um, what I was going to ask you next
there's a
was,
book called
yeah,
Anti-Fragile by Nassim Taleb. Do you know that book,
I
Anti-Fragile?
I heard this. I've heard of I haven't read it, but I've heard of it. Yeah.
Yeah, so Nassim, if you read that book, you'll see there's a little paragraph. Low back disorders by McGill is the medical example of loss control. Don't lose.
Right.
And it creates the anti-fragile back. But anyway, there's a little bit of a link to what uh, business people would know as loss control, and it's exactly the same principle in human performance development.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, on like the neurological pathway, or the focus on the neurology of an athlete, like you've talked more and more about like neural drive and things like this. Is that something that is that an area that you continue to be fascinated by?
Yes.
Yeah. And what about it do you think is appealing or compelling for you?
If I had two people and I said, grab my hand and
Mm-hmm.
squeeze as hard as you can,
Mm-hmm.
and one person gives you a wet fish effort and say, I'm not joking now. Squeeze my hand as hard as you can to show me
Yeah.
your strength. And if you're unable to show me your strength, you're going to die. Wow, that's a pretty heavy context. I better show some strength.
Mm-hmm.
And they still don't know how to do it. And then the next person comes in with such a beautiful, competent, they understand hand mechanics. The strongest part of the hand is between the meat of the hand and the base of the fingers, the lobster grip.
Mm-hmm.
Lock that in. And then you can feel their strength coming through every single finger. There's no deficits there.
Right.
And they know how to stiffen proximally and just create a grip strength that's just awesome. And by the way, that's what you want if you're holding an opponent's hand away and you're in a
Yeah.
combat situation
Yeah.
like in MMA or something like that. So grip strength is a big deal. And yet some people are just so unaware that they cannot connect their brain with their hand in this very simple demonstration. So what is strength? Strength starts as a thought. And I don't
Mm.
know if you want to go through this,
Go
but
for it. Yeah.
yeah, strength starts as a thought. You have to densify that thought. Some people don't know how to do this.
Mm.
And then you have to convert that thought into electrical impulse, which are nerve pulse trains. And then they have to transmit down the nerves, get to the muscle, and then you need a certain wisdom to translate the pulse trains into force. So there's a hell of a lot of
Yeah.
components there to work on. Where's the failure? Well, the first thing is the person doesn't even know how to think. to create strength. So now we study the great strength athletes, and they go to a mental place. They flip a switch and they unleash the fuse box. And as you know, if you go to a strength competition, say take powerlifting for example, you'll see the athletes swearing, screaming, slapping their face. You'll see it in combat situation,
Yeah.
in the combat sports as well, taking their brain to a place where they can densify those thoughts. Now, MMA is a little bit different because you also have to relax. If you use too much strength, you get stiff.
You got
And
no
you get
speed.
slow.
Yeah.
Or if you're fearful, you stiffen up. And the whole preparation with the combat athletes is to flow, dance to the music coming in to the cage, and all of these strategies that people don't realize what it's all about. They think, oh, that's cool music. No, that athlete has to stay loose and relaxed to get the speed, because if they get tense and afraid, they're done. But back to the strength athlete. So you'll find a lot of the power lifters go to this, I call it the dark place, to densify with almost a flight or fight kind of rage, that they can densify that. But here's human variability again. You've heard of, I know you have, Bill Kazmaier. He was the world's strongest man for the first 3 years that they ran the competition. And I know Bill. He's different. Bill is such a cerebral thinker. He thinks through how he's going to achieve this next feat of strength, and usually pulls things out that all the other strongmen miss. But Bill will say, I do it very differently. I don't go to a place of darkness. I go to a place of light. Well, he's the only guy I've ever heard of, and I'm not going to argue with him. And how, I can tell story after story about Bill on how he densifies neural drive, but he feels the power of the Lord invading his body, and supernatural things happen. But if you're with him, you'll see a little bead of sweat start to pop up here. And then all of a sudden he starts to sweat, and he goes goose pimply. And then he just crushes the strength thing. So he has that ability to transform his mind and densify the neural drive. So again, I'm giving you a spectrum now of how some people do it. But by far the most common, they have to flip a switch and go to that dark place. Then the next link is to form the pulse train. Now that basically the nerves are wires, electrical wires, and they have to carry the pulse train. So we can train that. Say a grinding bench press, get under a heavy load, have spotters, be right on the edge and grind through it. Okay, well, how do you grind? You grind, you use the lats, you bend the bar, you spread the bar, you pull the bar apart, you change the stiffness through your back and get a bench out of your back into the bench of the, do you see what I mean? There's a lot of grinding there, and that's teaching the nerves to carry heavy, dense signals. Then there's the speed aspect. I'll use an example of Brian Carroll, who currently holds the largest squat record of any human. He squatted 1,306 pounds. Well, I've been with Brian and I've seen this twice. This is amazing. We were sitting out on his back porch and a housefly flew by. He snatched it. There's the fly. Now, you tell me how anybody in this world can snatch a flying fly. And I've seen him do it twice. So his neurology is so special that he can create that speed. And people, I've heard these analogies. Oh, the powerlifters are the dump trucks of the athletic world. Well, they may be. They are grinders and they lift the heaviest loads, no question. But they also have a neurology where they can densify and create that speed. So you get a guy like Brian who's just so quick, and watch him deadlift 600 pounds. It's boom, the load is up. So he just rips it off the ground. So when he goes to lower loads, he still has that density, but the momentum obviously has to be built, and it will result in a slower speed. But anyway, I'm
I,
giving you all of these examples of the many different variables that go into grading speed. And then we look at all the inhibitors that people then put into place, unbeknownst to them and even to the coaches. A few recognize how to get rid of the impediments, but some don't.
I want to talk about that, but before we get into that, I don't know if this question makes sense. Is there a conscious versus unconscious neural densification? Like the ones who create this neural densification really, really well, would you say that it's less of a conscious thought? It's more and becomes it maybe initially there's it, but it becomes more of a subconscious kind of drive that happens after, because I can imagine, and this is a terrible personal example, but if I'm lifting, I find that if I'm very conscious about, okay, I got to stiffen all these kind of things up and like hold that stiffness and consciously think about it as I'm like going through a squat, I feel like I'm more likely to kind of um fail as I'm going through that squat in terms of maintaining stiffness. But if I create that initial stiffness, be conscious about it, and then I just kind of let it go, I find that that stiffness holds a lot better. I don't know if that makes any sense, what I'm asking or what I'm saying, but
Well, I think it does. I'm trying to do some pattern recognition as you go through that. And I would say if you trained to create a stronger neural engram, so you've now developed a lifting engram where you don't have to think of all of these little things. Initially, when you're establishing the engram, yes, you have to think about all of these things. Where am I going to stiffen? Where am I going to release?
mm-hmm.
Some people, when you coach them, oh, I want you to centrate down your shoulders and then pull with a pulse. And they can't because they couldn't separate stiffening their torso from stiffening their
Right.
shoulders.
Yeah.
So, but again, people are people. There's all different patterns that a great coach will figure out and know what coaching cues. But eventually, this is why athletes practice.
Mm,
They repeat movements and then they rehearse them in their minds, which is the visualization part. The rehearsal strengthens the engram to the point
mm,
that they are now in what we call a flow state. So they're just flowing through the lifts or the throws or it might be a jiu-jitsu match and they've got 3 moves now to get out of this submission or whatever it happens to be. But yeah, to reach that flow state, which is what I think you're talking
yeah.
about, is fabulous. But some people have it in them, and others they have to train that what's called an engram, and then let it flow.
For like let's say an Olympic lifter, um I don't know, I don't know if this is true, but is it true that like if they're going for that world record that they probably may have not practiced that a whole bunch? Like sometimes it's some of these things might be their first or second lift to kind of hit that world record, like, and if that's the case, then you're not necessarily able to practice get to that flow state at that point, right? Because you would have then practiced that. So, like, how does somebody get to that world record level without being able to get to that flow state?
Oh, I wish I could answer that, and
Mm,
and I'd be so much wiser. I can riff on it. I can't give
sure.
you a direct answer. So I've been involved with several world record performances
Yeah.
where it was the first time the athlete had ever done it.
Yeah.
So, like if I can use Brian, and we're best friends. We don't. He won't mind if I talk about his personal situation. So he holds the world all time record for squatting load. Can he do it again? I don't think so,
Mm,
and he doesn't think so either. Something happened that day, and by the way, he was in COVID. So he was suffering. He had COVID at the time. He ripped his bicep tendon off.
oh God.
People don't know this. He ripped his bicep tendon off 10 days, I think, before the world record. And he had it surgically reattached after. But again, people don't realize. But something happened that day. He'd never squatted that. He was close, but I forget where he'd previously been, but this was a good chunk over that, and he
Mm.
just did it, and it was beautiful. He just flew out of the hole, and it came together. And I can think of high jumps, for example, which is a single effort measurable score, a long jump, uh, um, a long drive.
Mm.
Now, have you ever been to a driving range and you hit a bucket of balls and there's one ball, you weren't thinking about it, and you
100%.
just hit that one ball and it uncorked? And suddenly, for me, like a 260-yard drive would be pretty cool.
Mm.
And where did that come from? Oh, let me try and do it again. I can't.
Nope. Nope. Nope.
So, something happened. Now, I know enough about it that I know what happened, but can I then replicate that with the next engram expression of that move? And the answer is I can't. But that's why all these guys are on the PGA Tour and I'm not.
Yeah.
But I don't know if that answers your question or not. It's a real uh, variable thing, and sometimes the stars align. And the body has, if we're still talking neurology,
Yeah.
there are the engrams, the movement tape that the person runs and expresses the movement.
Mhm.
Now we go to internal mechanics again, and all through the linkage, there are little loops, and many of them are inhibitory loops, and some of them are facilitating
Mm.
loops. For some reason, they inhibited the inhibitors. Now we're going back 2 layers into internal mechanics. So there's a natural inhibitor there that tries to not let you destroy your joint.
Mm.
Now there's an inhibitor to the inhibitor. Boy, it's fascinating. So for some alignment of the stars, but it wasn't magic. It's scientifically explainable. It's just I don't have the science in that particular case to have all the measures and explain what inhibited the inhibitor that allowed the performance to be unleashed. But
It's
it only happened once.
Yeah. And it makes me think like these athletes, like you said, a golfer, anyone who has to repeat these movements over and over again, and they can do so and at a really high level. Um, think of someone like Tiger Woods who's had his entire body's broken down, right?
Yeah.
Like you talk about the inhibiting the inhibitors, that's probably where he's going in many cases, hey?
I'm not allowed to talk about that.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, there's all sorts of confidentiality. So
Okay.
yeah.
All right. Um
Sorry.
That's okay. Now you've got me more curious, but it's all good. But I guess in general, forget about Tiger as a specific example, but somebody who like externally they got to produce the same movement over and over again. Internally, their body is saying, "I can't handle this," like the same movement. Um, and so it's like you got to stop what you're doing. But these athletes are able to inhibit that inhibitor, right? Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, I think you might be more into the psychological realm
Okay.
now.
Okay.
And I can think of one athlete who was suffering terribly with the flu.
Yeah.
And the world championship was in Florida outside.
Mm.
And it was a 7-minute event. And they had several heats and then the final. They're already running a high temperature with the flu.
Mm.
And uh, a normal person like you or I would say, I can't get out of bed today.
Mm.
But they did.
Yeah.
They got down to the course.
Yeah.
They ran the heats, won every one of them, and then won the world championship,
Yeah.
and then collapsed. Not dead, but it took a chunk. So that is a psychological toughness
Mm.
that you ignore all of these other signals, and
Okay. Yeah. Let's
you know
shift to
that athlete, by the way.
probably. Yeah.
Yeah, I sleep with her. It was Catherine. She won um, the senior masters world championships in 2019, I guess it was.
Wow.
Yeah, she came back with, I think it was 5 gold medals or something. But anyway, there's just an example of extreme mental toughness that you see in the great ones who. That was a bit disrespectful what I said, by the way, but I was trying to be mildly entertaining.
No, it's good. I feel like I got to be talking to her, not to you,
Oh yeah,
man.
of course you should be talking to her. I'm
God,
a
she should be in
nobody.
my. She's
You and
gonna
I
be
are
my
the
next
two
nobody.
nobodies. Yeah,
Totally. Yeah.
what a privilege it's been to uh, really get to know someone of
Yeah.
that special uh, ability.
The few interactions I've had with Catherine, she's such a sweet person. Just
She
awesome.
is.
Yeah.
She
Yeah.
is. But
Yeah.
that's when I was talking about when an athlete can flip the switch
Yeah.
and they become killers.
Goodness. Okay, I'm definitely going to be emailing her to talk to her at some point. So,
So,
but
as you know, she's a sports psychology consultant.
yeah.
She can talk about all of that, but
Oh,
you
that's
won't find
amazing.
a more humble.
Yeah.
Well, she has to be very tolerant because she
Sure.
puts up with my nonsense every day. But no, she'd be a wonderful guest for you to talk to.
Yeah. Yeah. Stu, we've talked about strength skill a little bit. I want to talk about some of the other skills. Speed. Let's talk. We got a little bit into it. The to create that speed skill. What are your observations? What have you? And I know you've done some of this research too about, like, the pulse and relax and pulsing kind of thing. So we can talk about a little bit more of that. But when we talk about the speed athlete, the speed skill, what are keys to developing that kind of skill?
Select your parents, number one.
Okay.
Now, even though you've selected your parents and they've bestowed upon you special genes, it doesn't mean your brothers and sisters get it.
Mm,
I've worked with two top medalist Olympic sprinters, and one of them had, I think it was 6 siblings. None of them were athletes. And yet this one is basically the fastest or the second fastest person in the world. It's amazing. So somehow that came together. But the next thing, yes, well, if you don't have this, you won't be a world-class sprinter. And that's the ability to contract muscle quickly, but more importantly, to relax as quickly.
mm.
So I think you might have been around when we were doing the muscle relaxation experiments, or was that before your time?
Would that be like when, like just with like GSP, for instance, and you
But
do
yeah,
the,
some of the
yeah,
MMA athletes. I
yeah,
think
yeah,
that
yeah,
was during your
yeah,
tenure
yeah, yeah,
with
yeah,
us. Yeah.
yeah,
So when you take so UFC combat athletes, so obviously they're all fabulous.
yeah,
If you're in that league, you're pretty special. So just think of a strike. Is this a video as well, by the way?
yep. It is. We can see you. We're good.
But the playback could be audio or video. So if I
It's gonna be
showed
both.
something,
Yeah,
yeah. So to use strength to create a strike, boom, you need a pulse. But muscles create force and stiffness.
mm,
And so if you don't let the pulse go quickly, you're so strong that you can't move. So you've got to boom. And then again, when the projectile, your fist or your foot or whatever it happens to be, hits the target, you must pulse again to go
mm,
through it. So boom, boom. You have to pulse, relax, pulse, relax. Think of coming out of the starting blocks. You prime a little bit of pre-stiffness in the core because that acts like a stone. But then when the hips fire, they act like a hammer. So they fire and propel a stone. If your spine was soft, they propel a rope, and you can't
mm,
push rope. But very few people have the ability to strategically organize stiffness in one spot and a hammer pulse in the other, and then turn it off very quickly. So, and the original experiments were done by Leonid Matveev. one of the great Russian scientists at the
Mm.
Moscow Institute, and he was measuring Olympic lifters. And the Olympic lifters, if they're going to rip a bar into a snatch, they
Yeah.
would rip, and then the bar, there's a point where they have to snap underneath it.
Hmm.
Well, at that point, you have to totally relax your body. Well,
It's
what a
crazy.
crazy thing.
Yeah.
Who in their right mind is going to relax when they
Yeah.
have 100 kilo over
Yeah.
their head?
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, it's such a mind bender.
Yeah.
But that's one of the gifts, by the way, of training Olympic style. It's to keep honing in on the speed of the uh, concentric rip and then go into the relaxed eccentric and snap underneath it. But it's the same with sprints. Those who can pulse and then relax the leg so they get a faster recovery of the leg through, and then another pulse. You see how much effort Olympic sprinters put into relaxing, relax,
Hmm.
relax. You were talking about the Eastern Europeans and the Russians and whatnot. Some of the best conversations I've had with Jamaican sprint coaches. Man, they know this stuff. They're
Mm.
so good at it, and they train it. And I've done some consulting there. My role was to create a better, stiffer core,
Hmm.
and they create better hammers.
Mm.
And that's how you produce speed, which I think is your question. So
What would you see
the
from?
great ones, just to finish that off from a
Yeah.
quantitative point of view, they can relax muscle uh, 6 times faster than you grad students and me. I was working with an athlete about a month ago, who's
Hmm.
again top level female in her sport, and she just had her hands over the dowel that's in the corner here, and I dropped the stick, and they have to snatch it and catch it.
Yeah.
It's now you can strength train, work in the weight room, all you like. It won't enhance your speed of relaxation. Those are very special drills. And again, a Jamaican sprint coach knows it. A Russian weightlifting coach knows it. How often am I consulting in a top level football program in the US and the strength coaches talk about rate of relaxation in the
Right.
weight room?
Right.
It's unheard of.
No.
So, there's statistics that are kind of interesting. When you look at the 40 yard sprint times of high schoolers coming into a college football program and
Hmm.
then measure their 40-yard time when they leave, do you know a lot of the time it's slower? Now, I get
Mm.
it. They're bigger and stronger and all the rest of it. However, these are all very, very interesting discussion points.
These Jamaican coaches, these Russian coaches, are they training relaxation as part of the movement that they're trying to get the athlete to perform, or do you notice if it's a separate kind of drill altogether?
Starts out as a separate drill to get some of the base neurology,
Okay.
and then that gets transferred to the sport, and that's a whole nother
I was gonna
discussion
say, yeah.
on itself. So the transfer, again, you and I can talk about this. Can I talk about this to most other people? They won't have a clue.
Yeah.
So yes, you train to create the base ability, shall we say.
Yeah. Yeah.
But what's the transfer of what you're doing in the training center, the gym, the whatever, into the expression in the sport? And that is, again,
Mm.
I see things on social media, and I don't think they are even aware of
Mm.
the skill of the transfer function.
I must have got it wrong then, because or maybe like, because when I used to train the basketball team, and when I first learned from you about this pulse relaxation, what I used to have the basketball guys do is, in terms of training just like their foot speed or their sprinting speed, as I would actually have them, you know, do it in the movement. And so,
Yes.
I'd have them initiate a sprint for a couple of strides and then completely just relax. And it might just be even having them like fall down or something like that in a safe way. I wouldn't necessarily do these kind of base drills first. And so now I'm thinking about it, like, maybe I should have done
Well,
that. But
that's okay. You
yeah.
can still make progress.
Mm,
So, let's go back to the sprint analogy once again, because people are familiar with the A's and B strides of sprinting.
yeah.
That's all about quick feet
Yeah.
and faster turnover and downhill running, etc. So now you work on loosening the jaw,
Mm,
open your hands up, relax, be chill. And now let's do it again. Faster A's and B's. I want faster foot speed. I want more relaxation
mm.
through where you're holding tension, which is translating into the joint that you're trying to let fly. But it's hard to,
Yeah. Yeah.
and again, it's easy for some people, the great ones, but it's hard. It's funny. I'll teach a core stiffening exercise to someone and then they can't do a push-up because now they've frozen their shoulders. And what I was
Yeah.
trying to do was to get them to do a clapping push-up and back down again, and a double clap, triple clap,
Mm.
where you have to relax, pulse, relax, pulse. And they're so confused. Uh, and yet others who get it, they win.
My first personal experience with this sort of pulse relax thing was, I don't know if you know this about me. I was a trained black belt in Taekwondo a long time ago,
Yeah, yeah,
and
I remember something about that.
yeah,
That's
and
why I always treated you with respect. I never wanted
oh
to
well.
see your fury.
I was when I became a black belt, my master at the time, he's like, all right, let's spar, and we're sparring in front of all the other junior belts or whatever, and I was all right. I was like 14 or 15, and so I was like, okay, let's see if I can hit this guy, right? And to my teacher, my master, and so I was like, okay, I'm just gonna stay really relaxed, and then I just popped him with this jab right in the nose. And I just remember the feeling of like I was so relaxed, and then I just immediately, like, yeah, stiffened through the shoulder, relaxed, and then boom, stiffened right at the end, and it was magic. And he was just like, he was so caught off guard that I was able to get past his his defense there. And then of course he knocked me out after the fact for doing that, but it was it was I got knocked out right after. But it was fun when that moment happened. So that was my experience of stiffen and pulse and relax. So yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Well, there you paid a little tuition, but look at the gift it gave you.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. That's a good way of putting it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Speed skill. We talk about strength
That's
skill.
another. We'll talk with athletes, and they're all down and whatnot, and I'll say, "Oh, well, you just paid a little tuition. Let's get back to work."
I like that. I like that. Yeah. Um, the elastic athlete, those throwers, those golfers, maybe the same kind of thing, perhaps with the pulse relaxation. But in terms of the characteristics or observations you see in these elastic athletes, what sticks out for you?
Well, several things.
Okay.
Whereas, and again, you're hitting me out of the blue here, so I'll go to bed tonight and I'll say, "Oh, why did I answer so stupidly to Rupesh?" But for that sprinter that we were just talking about, I'm looking for symmetry. Don't want
Mm,
any right or left snags. You gave me the example of a thrower. They're going to have to be highly asymmetric. And have they tuned the asymmetries to optimally store and then recover elastic energy? Then are they using the right technique and sequence? So to crack the whip, you can get a bull whip and try and get it to snap. And as you perfect the timing and the technique, all of a sudden it just cracks.
mm,
But it might take a while to get there. So there's just an example of tuning the elastics, then honing the technique to really get the the golf club head speed up, or racket speed, or speed of a fist off the back rear right toe, through the linkage.
mm.
Uh, if we're talking Taekwondo as an example.
Yeah.
So again, we get back to, you got to know the sport. You've got to know this machine that is a linkage with force producers, stiffening elements that guide and control emotions,
Yeah.
run by a computer that is trying to express an engram that didn't sleep so well the night before, so now it's a little slow. You
Mm.
know what I mean? It just never ends. It's
Yeah. Yeah.
but be careful with strength with the elastic athlete. I think we saw the upshot of an era that the professional golfers went through, and they started to do Olympic lifting and whatnot under the influence of a couple, and we saw some terrific flameouts. It was tragic. And
Mm.
then you'll see, oh, that kind of disappeared. Now
That's
they're
true.
back to, more modest strength training. But the ones who are there for the long game are not the ones who are pumping heavy weights in a weight room.
Yeah.
So again, realizing that these are elastic athletes and their athleticism may not be enhanced, even when the ones who were strength training did their long drive and increase. No.
Mm.
So it was the wrong tool, and it was detuning the athleticism and the resilience of that as a category of elastic athletes. And now I'm thinking of hockey players. So many pro hockey players play a lot of golf in the summers.
Yeah.
Well, when you think of it, there's a great parallel of elasticity there. And I saw an interesting statistic a little while ago, whereas I forget how many years they went back, 20 or 25 years, and they looked at the top goal scorers who were on average getting close to 220 pounds
Mm.
and all this kind of thing. And then the world changed with much more of a Russian European training influence. And now the athletes are just explosive
Mm-hmm.
monsters with great tuned elastics. They don't train like they trained 25 years ago. And the great goal scorers now, I think the sweet spot is somewhere around 180 pounds.
Yeah, if you look at Connor McDavid, who's in my city here, like he's not
Yeah.
the biggest person there
Oh
is,
no.
but he incredibly speedy. Yeah.
Yeah. So that was a transformation, and the recognition of the elastic elements and how they train them. So I don't know, Connor. I know a little bit about his orthopedic history, but I've personally have never
Yeah.
worked with him. But I know the crew that did, and they're savvy.
Yeah. I don't know if this question makes sense, but what role do fascial linkages play in an elastic athlete?
Well, it can be huge.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this uh, think of a athlete who puts on, let's take a power lifter who puts on a lifting suit.
Yeah.
It massively changes their performance.
Mm.
You could put on a knee wrap, and it would change athletic output and resilience, by the way,
Mm.
in certain cases. So tuning of the fascia. I mean, I had an athlete. I made a video of it. It's in our assessment course. Actually, I've got several examples where we will have an athlete on the table and we'll do something in their leg to create a nerve tension. Then I'll bring their arm over their head and they'll say, "Oh, my pain just went away out of my leg."
Mm.
Good. Now extend your wrist. Oh yeah, there's the pain
Mm.
in their leg.
Mm.
And and all I'm doing is playing with fascial tensions. I might spin the arm, and then again we'll see a manifestation somewhere else. So this is all from a pain perspective, but
Yeah.
it also very much has to do with tuning the springs. So the fascia, as you know, it covers every muscle fiber. Uh, you remember experiments that we used to do on rats, for example, where
Mm.
we would cut through half the muscle, measure the force potential, and it was almost all there, say 90%. Well,
Yeah.
how did that happen? Even the muscle fibers that were cut were still connected in a parallel fashion with fascia, and it was the fascia that was transmitting the force. They didn't need a tendon at the end. They were
Yeah.
transmitting force to their neighbors. And then the whole fascia, epimysium, and well, the covering of muscle was then transmitting force. And as you know, there are muscles that don't even have a tendinous connection; they just go
That's
into
right.
the fascia.
Yeah.
So it's something, I must say, that I've become much more skilled myself in. I would say over the last 10 years, even since I retired, I've become more appreciative of it. And working with the great fascial gurus,
Hmm.
not the pretenders, but the ones who create Olympic athletes and restore professional careers.
Yeah.
They are special. They're the real deal, and they know how to tune the soft tissues.
In terms of actually helping with the recovery of those soft tissues, particularly fascia, um, is there do you notice with those coaches, is there something actively that they're doing there? Because I imagine you still want to maintain some level of stiffness within this fascia. You don't want to necessarily like if you think about doing some soft tissue work, you probably don't want to be overly aggressive on some of these fascial tissues, I would think.
The gurus are some of them are so gentle. I mean, I think of oh, she's going to kill me, Anne Frederick. You know the book Stretch to Win. If
Okay.
you work with Anne, she is so gentle. Uh, and I've seen her work with an athlete, and we were joking. She was working on their hip, and she was there for 20 minutes. She's not a big woman, and she
Mm.
was there with this athlete's leg for 20 minutes, and then all of a sudden it started to give and go. And she said, well, I'm romancing the joint and I'm romancing the
Mm.
neural system to allow the fascial system. And then you start realizing how innervated the fascial system is, and she had to inhibit the inhibitors.
Mm.
She knew how to do it,
Wow.
and made remarkable progress. And then I think of someone who has these magical fingers, say someone like Barents Beitos in Los Angeles, who
Okay.
can take an athlete, feel around in a joint, and doesn't massage it, doesn't do gross things. His finger goes to a target and knows how to release that one little thing and maybe keep all the other things the proper stiffness to control and keep joint integrity and all the rest of it. So he's
Yeah.
just a master of the craft. And these people are, all of them are sort of the best known unknown to
Yep.
in the world of high performance. People know who these gurus are,
Yeah.
but they're not in the public. They're not on social media. But at the Olympics, everyone knows them.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
But that's
Um,
my perception after working with them. And I think of a guy like Clayton Skaggs, who you may recall. He's now the medical director of the Central Institute for Human Performance. What he does, I can't even explain it, but he
mm,
works on the fascia and different things, and just takes pain away and unleashes movement, and it's un,
unbelievable.
it's unbelievable.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, maybe just to sort of wrap up on a couple of things.
Yeah, I'm going to have to go fairly soon. I've got a patient shortly.
No problem. Um, final two questions. One, any sort of last observations that you have of world class athletes that you think you want people to know?
I can't think of anything unless you can think of something.
No,
I
nothing.
mean,
Nothing.
again, I mean, as you know, I can respond to people. I don't go out looking for them. Uh,
Yep.
they just come to me. So I don't. I'm not. I'm struggling to look for a question or a topic here. Uh, I'd just as soon ask about your daughter.
I think where my mind was going at is, like again, 15, 16 years ago, that uncovery around pulse relaxation, that was sort of like it seemed like a really forming thought, to like now really focus on like the neurology, the neural drive. Like what's something that you're looking at right now that you're really curious about that you're like, man, that is really something there when it comes to a world-class athlete.
There is no such thing as a single thing.
Okay.
I'm getting better all the time at appreciating the package.
Yeah.
My assessments get more detailed all the time. And my impressions back to the athlete and the plan on what they should do probably improves in its comprehensiveness and in a staged progression. So here's how I recommend you start. Here are some of the benchmarks to know when we should consider some of these other things. And then at that point, it's going to need a reassessment to know
Mm.
your response, and then how we have to go to reach the goals that we've defined up here that will get you into the Olympics this summer or
Yeah.
back into the NFL or whatever the
Yeah.
case may be.
Yeah. Yeah. Great. Stu, my friend, I really appreciate you. I really like this. Means a lot for you to spend some time with me here. Always love talking to you about this work, but also get really just glad to know that health wise you're doing great. And the next McGill to be on my podcast will be Catherine McGill, so you don't have to worry about that. I'm
Yeah,
looking forward
I
to
think
talking to
you
her.
and your audience will really enjoy her.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Can I say something, Rupesh?
absolutely, of course.
So, as a professor, we spent pretty intense times together
Mm,
for those years, and uh, you develop a relationship with your students. I mean, I spent more time with you than I did my own kids during
mm,
those times. When you think about it, so you are my academic son,
mm.
and I'll always think like that as I do with almost all of my students. And so I'm so proud of what you've done and how you've been confident to reach out and expand your career and make big contributions as you're doing now uh, in in your government work. So anyway,
Thank you. That
I
means
have to
that.
tell you that. I'd
Thank you.
give
That
you a
means
hug if you were here.
I have to see you in person. I told you I've been meaning to come visit you in the summer, and I haven't had a chance to. So one day that's going to
Okay.
happen. I'll
Well,
bring
if
my
you
family
come,
over.
I'll
So
give you a beer and I'll have a water.
I thought you were going to say I'm one of those special people that you'll have a beer with, Stu.
I will. I will.
Okay,
For
awesome,
you, of course, we're going to have a beer.
great. I appreciate you. Just stick around for a couple 1 minute, just to make sure we upload the feed here. But
For sure.
yeah, thanks so much, and thanks everyone for tuning in. Like, subscribe, do all those wonderful things, and I'll see you on the next episode. Cheers.